Speak to Ben Jones, who's Director of Case Operations and Outreach at Free Speech Union. Ben, what do you think's going on here? Because to me, there's one of two explanations for the direction of travel that Sir Keir Starmer has chosen to take. One, and the media obviously following suit, or maybe three. Let's add a possible third option. One is that this is sort of a nudge unit response, which by not actually calling this, you know, a fight of two sides, let's say, only labelling one side. This is in order to prevent further conflagration and to try and calm things down, because if he were to come out and talk about their Muslim mobs as well, that this might further invoke and incite those who are kicking in shop windows to carry on doing that. It could make things worse. So that's one theory. The other theory is he just can't see it, that somehow to get to where he's gotten in his life and in his career, having to follow the ever-evolving taboo, he has sort of been gaslit so much he believes what's coming out of his mouth and can't even see the wood from the trees. Or the third possible is I'm wrong here and somehow I'm mad and it is what he's saying. What do you think's going on?
Well, I think we've seen the same playbook, frankly, throughout my entire adult life. And we've seen this, let's go to the Manchester arena bombings, then the messages don't look back in anger. After the murder of Sir David Amess by a jihadist, the national debate is steered to a ludicrous conversation about banning online anonymity on social media, which was nothing to do with the murder. It was there was no connection whatsoever to the facts of the case. In the last fortnight, we've had Downing Street and Parliament lit up in pink, as if that's going to help anybody with anything. And again, we've returned to this ludicrous conversation about online anonymity as if that's the real problem. And I think what's happened is that the social fabric in this country is so utterly undone by decades of mass immigration that people have not wanted, that people have voted against at every opportunity. There has been chronic political unresponsiveness to the reasonable and temperate demands of the public, that even without social media, if social media vanished tomorrow, we would still have the preconditions for serious social unrest in this country.
I think you're right. And something else I want to ask you, you talk about the fact that there has not been a conversation, a sensible conversation, apart from maybe between folks like us when we sit in the pub together, about what is going on, which is damaging the fabric of society. It's completely corrosive against our cohesion. And there has been not just censorship over this, but vilification of people who even dare to try to have that conversation. That's been going on for decades. How worried are you that actually this will, as a result of what's happening now, intensify? Because it seems to me the direction of travel right now from Yvette Cooper and from Sir Keir Starmer is to, rather than listen, go even further to silence, go even further to name call and vilify. I do believe that there has been a huge amount of inflammatory information and misinformation put on social media platforms. I've been saying for a long time, frankly, I'd pull the plug on a lot of it. I think it's a social experiment that's gone wrong. Until we know how to regulate it and deal with unbridled publishing that can so easily be penetrated and corrupted, particularly by foreign enemies, then perhaps we should have a rethink about it altogether, rather than try and sort of somehow control it retrospectively, which will only ever go in one direction or the other. But it seems to me that controlling it is what Sir Keir Starmer is now talking about. He's talking about the sort of people posting things online in the same breath as talking about the people who are setting fire to hotels full of migrants. Now, while I agree that you need to figure out what to do with social media, I'm kind of concerned about there being a slight dystopian bent to all of this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these things are just storing up trouble for later. It's kicking the can down the road. Suppressing discussion of these issues is only going to make the explosion of public anger worse, whether it happened again next week, whether it happens again next year or 10 years from now. Now, God willing, the riots will come to an end very swiftly. There's been absolutely no excuse for some of the scenes that we've seen, but I think two permanent things, at least, have changed. Firstly, it will not easily be forgotten, the scenes of hundreds of Islamist protesters, some of them carrying weapons, some of them attacking the vehicles of journalists. That's the first change. I think that cannot be unseen. Secondly, I think what has happened is that identity politics that has been played at, or as other groups have been encouraged, certainly in the last 10 years, to play at that game in an incredibly divisive and destructive way. And now, unfortunately, many white Britons are saying, OK, well, if those are the new rules of how to thrive how to get by in modern Britain, if that's what we've got to do to make our voices heard, that's what we're going to do as well. And I think that's a complete disaster and an entirely avoidable, entirely predictable one.
Ben, something's just caught my eye, which is why I've put my bins on and looked up to the corner of my studio here that I want to talk to you about. Now, I think one of the contributing incidents that's led to this huge sort of outburst of frustration, to put it mildly, was what happened at Manchester Airport. Those two youths, and when we saw the first footage being circulated, the clipped and silenced footage of the police kicking the head of a man prone on the ground, we thought, gosh, this is terrible. Then we had this sort of dreadful solicitor, frankly, saying that this was an attempted assassination, trying to stir everybody up into believing this is a purely racist incident. And then we saw the wider footage of these two feral characters beating the heck out of a police officer. One had lost consciousness, one had a broken nose. They were carrying firearms, and the response, whilst edited down might have looked dreadful, started to take on a completely different complexion. Well, as I'm speaking to you, I'm looking right now on the screens of Sky News and on the screens of BBC News, who are playing a press conference of the family, right, of those individuals. In fact, one of the individuals, Mr. Punch the Woman in the Face, is sitting there with his nicely groomed beard in a little suit, looking like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. And I ask myself, given everything going on right now, and the fact that we're all being told to shut up and not talk about things because it's going to further inflame situations, why on earth I'm seeing this nonsense? Why are we giving these lot airtime when people are saying they should be bouncing off the walls of a prison cell?
Well, one thing that occurs to me, actually in response to something you said a moment ago, and I think it goes back to the importance not of social media generally, but of Twitter, of X in particular, which is the ability of people to find facts and information for themselves. Now, you do run the risk of seeing some misinformation. You do run the risk of seeing rumour and gossip that later turns out to be baseless. But I think it's crucial for getting the full context around these incendiary moments, these incidents, these viral moments that occur, that flare through cyberspace, that cause real-world consequences as well. And it's usually on Twitter that you will first get the reality, the unvarnished truth of what is going on. And you have to use your own intellect and your own intelligence and judgment to sift through what you are seeing. But I think Twitter has played such a vital role, particularly in the last 2 weeks, for all sorts of breaking news events. It really is without parallel. Whereas if you go, for instance, to the BBC or Sky News website, you get a version of what is going on that you have to parse, that's difficult to comprehend. You have to work out what is really being said. You have to work out who is really being talked about. And it's impossible to work out actually what is going on.